Hello, everyone. So let's go ahead and begin with Chapter 17, Methods of Persuasion. Now, there are 4 reasons why listeners are persuaded. So when I refer to listeners, I mean the audience. Now, the audience perceives the speaker as a highly credible source on the topic that they're discussing. Now, keep this in mind as you enter any type of classroom when you are watching or listening to a lecture. The professor, you're always perceiving them as a highly credible source. Now, it is very important for us as speakers, especially student speakers, we need to establish that credibility for the audience. So that way they're always perceiving us as a highly credible source. Now, the second reason why listeners are persuaded is because they're won over by the speaker's evidence. Meaning, as a speaker, when you're presenting evidence, supporting information, statistics, testimonies, whatever it may be, you're persuading them with these valuable materials, this valuable information. So that's how the audience gets persuaded. But not only do you present this materials, you're also supposed to provide reasoning. So the third reason why the audience are easily persuaded by listeners is because they're convinced by the speaker's reasoning. So if I present a ton of statistics and testimonies, there's really no reasoning attached, right? I'm just essentially giving you statistics and facts. But you want to make sure as a speaker that you are explaining the reason why you are presenting this evidence. Essentially, you are attaching, connecting the dots together for the audience. So they are not only won over by the evidence, but they're convinced by the reasoning you give to them. Now, the fourth reason why listeners are persuaded is because of the emotional appeal by the speaker's ideas. So as a speaker, you're emotionally appealing to the audience. So this definitely depends on whatever topic you have at hand, but regardless of what it is, you want to make sure that you are using an emotion that brings out the best of your topic. So if I'm trying to persuade my audience to adopt a dog from the animal shelter, I would personally believe that maybe evoking some type of a sad response will get my audience to go ahead and adopt the dog from the animal shelter. So it just depends on whatever emotion you want to persuade or to convey to your audience. Just make sure whatever emotion that you want to convey, it matches a topic that you have at hand. Now, highly credible, evidence, reasoning, emotional appeal. These words sound familiar. Now, I want to ask you, what are the 3 words to describe credibility, evidence/reasoning, and emotional appeal? Now, these 3 words are some words that we may have heard in the past in our K through 12 learning. This is ethos, pathos, and logos, all of which we'll be discussing today. So let's go ahead and begin with ethos. Now, ethos, according to your textbook, is essentially credibility. So your credibility as a speaker. Now, the credibility as a speaker is affected by an individual's competence and character. Now, it is very important for us as speakers to be competent, meaning that essentially we have performed the necessary research. We performed and gathered all the information. So this is completely based on the speaker's intelligence, the speaker's expertise, and the speaker's knowledge of the subject. So it is affected by the competence. Are you a competent speaker on the topic you have at hand? Now, it is also affected by the speaker's character. So is the speaker being sincere with the topic they're presenting? Are they trustworthy? Do they have any concern for the audience's well-being? Now, these are the 2 things that the audience always have in mind in regards to the speaker and their credibility. So again, that is competence and character. Now, there's 3 different types of credibility that's discussed in your textbook. The first type is initial credibility. So this is the audience's perception of the speaker before the speech begins. So automatically, as an audience member, we think that the speaker is already a credible source before the speech begins. So again, initial credibility is before the speech begins. Now, the second type of credibility is essentially derived credibility. So this is everything a speaker says and does during the speech. So derived credibility is everything a speaker says and does during the speech. So this is really the area where we establish credibility. So remember, if we reflect back to the speech organization and specifically to the introduction, one of the elements that we must always have is establishing credibility. So this is where you mention to the audience how you are a credible source. So this could be you have personal interests, you have had personal experience, or the big one, you have performed research on the topic. So again, derived credibility is everything a speaker says or does during during the speech. So everything a speaker says during the speech. Now, the third type of credibility is terminal credibility. So with terminal credibility, I really want you to associate the word terminal, like the end. So terminal, the end. Okay, so terminal credibility is the audience's perception of the speaker at the end of the speech. So keep in mind, the audience already has a perception that you're a credible person on the topic before the speech begins. And then during the speech, you're still establishing that credibility. You're still having that derived credibility because everything that you say and do is what determines if you have credibility on the topic at hand. Now, terminal credibility is really the factor of the audience's perception if you're still a credible source at the end of the speech. So you have to be credible before, during, and after the speech. So it's very, very important that we remain a credible speaker at the topic we have at hand. So overall, this is ethos, credibility. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to be giving you more tips about ethos. So let's go ahead and move forward. So with ethos, it is important for us to establish a common ground with our audience. So according to your textbook, establishing common ground is when a speaker connects themselves with the values, attitudes, and experiences of the audience. So essentially, you're trying to make that connection of relating with the audience. So that way they're able to view you as a more credible source on the topic you have at hand. So it's very important for us to try to establish common ground. So if I'm trying to persuade everyone to go to graduate school, a way for me to establish common ground is saying, well, I'm also a student just like you, or I have been to grad school. So if anyone's interested in pursuing higher education after receiving your bachelor's, definitely, tune in. Let's listen to what I'm about to say. So again, establishing common ground is when a speaker connects themselves with the values, attitudes, or experiences of the audience. So again, we want to make sure we always have the audience's best interests in mind and that we are covering topics that they will be interested to learn more about. Now, the second tip I have for you is you want to deliver your speech fluently, expressively, and with conviction. So essentially, remember, with this upcoming speech, your persuasive speech, you are persuading someone to do a certain thing, act upon a certain action, or follow certain values. So you're persuading your audience to do something. You're not informing them. So remember, when we were informing, we were just presenting information as if we were a teacher. Now, when we are persuading, in this role, we are an advocate. We are essentially the car salesperson. We are trying to get you to buy whatever we are trying to sell. So it is important that our energy and our delivery matches the persuasive speech, and especially the topic you have at hand. So regardless of what topic you have, you want to make sure you are speaking expressively, fluently, and with conviction. You really, really want to sell that for your audience. Now, the third is to advertise your expertise. Now, I did talk a little bit about this in the previous slide, but I want to ask you, when do you advertise your expertise? Yes, it's in the introduction of the speech. This is where you establish your credibility. So make sure you are always establishing your credibility in the introduction of the speech, so that way your audience is well informed about how you relate to the topic at hand and why you are a credible source to discuss the topic. So remember, credibility, if you build it, they will learn. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, which we will be talking about logos. Now, logos, according to your textbook, is the logical appeal of a speaker. So logos, logic, connect that together. So logical appeal of a speaker. Now, there's two different key terms that I'm going to be covering for logos. The first is evidence, and the second is reasoning. So the first I want to begin with is evidence. So evidence is supporting materials used to prove or disprove something. So supporting materials used to prove or disprove something. So evidence is all the materials you gather typically from research. So this could be examples, statistics, and testimonies. So essentially evidence is very supportive for your topics or whatever main points that you're highlighting, but it's even more important to provide reasoning, right? So if I just give you random statistics, as an audience member, you're trying to make that connections like, okay, how does this relate back to the topic? Like, why do I need to know this materials? Well, with reasoning, we want to make sure we're drawing a conclusion based on the evidence. So again, we're trying to connect everything together. So if I just give you evidence, okay, your audience can be like, and so remember, reasoning, we are drawing a conclusion on the basis of the evidence. So we are piecing everything together. So just make sure that your reasoning is sound, meaning it makes sense. There's a logical connection. Remember, logos, logical appeal. Now, the second thing too, is you want to make sure you get your listeners to agree with what your reasoning is. So that's the whole purpose of the persuasive speech, right? Persuasive speaking overall. You want to get the listeners to agree with you. So if you're providing them evidence, you're providing these supporting materials, you want to make sure you're drawing those conclusions together based on the evidence, so that way they're able to agree with your own reasoning, agree with what you're saying and delivering to them. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm more than happy to email you back and clarify whatever questions that you have. Now, let me go ahead and talk about some tips for logos. The first tip that I have is use new and specific evidence. Remember, your audience is going to be wondering, how does this information relates back to me? So make sure you're presenting them statistics, information, testimonies, examples, all things that are relevant to 2022, to the year that it is. So again, make sure that it is relevant and new. So we don't want to be presenting information from 1955 about the workforce rate. It would be better to present something more recent, so that way it's more relevant and more applicable to the audience, especially when you're trying to persuade, right? You're trying to get them to agree with what you're saying and trying to get them to act upon whatever you're trying to persuade them to do. Now, the second is make sure you have credible sources. So make sure you have to always look for authorship, sponsorship, and recency. Those are the three very important things that we are always searching for when we are gathering materials. So make sure we have the author, and if there's no author, who's the sponsor, and how recent is this information? So make sure you are having credible sources. Now, the third thing I want to leave off on is make sure that your points are clear. So when you're persuading your audience to act upon a certain action or to do whatever your topic is, you want to make sure it is clear and convincing. So make sure you're speaking very clearly and you're drawing those connections. So bringing up the evidence and drawing those connections for them clearly. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Now, the third type is pathos. Now, pathos is used to describe emotional appeal. Used to describe emotional appeal. So essentially, it's all these different types of feelings that you can have when you're listening to a speaker. So it could be fear, it could be compassion, excitement, guilt, anger, pride, happiness, all these emotions that you could evoke for the audience. Now, I want to play one video to begin, and I want you to tell me like what type of emotion you get from watching this.
There once was a
Okay, so what emotion do you get from this? Is it excitement? Is it happiness? Is it joy? Because that's all the emotions that I get, especially watching this commercial when I was younger. Oh my goodness, I wanted to go to Six Flags ASAP. I wanted to be dancing like this older man. Like, so this is essentially the pathos, right? So they're using emotional appeal. So as a child, which obviously you could tell they're trying to convince the child, they're trying to also convince the parents, like you can have happiness, excitement, joy, all these happy emotions if you go to Six Flags. Now let's go ahead and look at another video that's on the opposite side of the spectrum. So this is the ASPCA Arms of the Angel. It's a really old commercial too. And typically this would evoke what type of feelings? If you say anger, if you say sadness, most definitely. So you see how pathos is used for emotional appeal to the audience. They're trying to get them to emotionally commit to whatever they're saying. So for Six Flags, they're trying to emotionally get you happy and excited to go to Six Flags and get those feelings. And for the ASPCA animal cruelty video, they really want you to empathize with the animals who are abused. They want you to feel sadness and at times even anger so that we could donate and support the foundation. So these are two examples of emotional appeal. Now, in your speeches, when you're practicing Monroe's motivated sequence, there is a fourth element, which is visualization, right? So with visualization, this is where you're using that descriptive emotional language to try to place your audience into the context of your topic. So when you are developing your speeches, the first tip that I have for you is to make sure you are using emotional language. You want to get a response from your audience. So it's completely up to you what you decide what emotion to convey. So again, it depends on the topic you have at hand. Now, the second tip that I have for you is you want to make sure you're developing these vivid examples. So hand in hand, it goes back with using emotional, really descriptive language. You're really trying to paint this image for your audience. You're trying to get them to emotionally appeal, agree with whatever you're trying to persuade them to do or to follow or to believe, right? So you want to make sure that you are using these vivid, emotional, real descriptive language. Now, the third tip I have for you is you want to make sure you're speaking with sincerity and conviction. So if I'm trying to persuade everyone to go to Six Flags, I'm going to have the energy of this older man, like pumped up, like, yes, let's go to Six Flags, all hyped up. Now, if I'm trying to persuade you all to donate to the ASPCA, the Animal Cruelty Foundation, to help combat animal cruelty, now, then I would probably change my demeanor a little bit more to either be speaking with more conviction and perhaps a little bit more anger, like we have to donate, we need to support these animals who are always abused and in these really unfortunate situations, or I could be more somber. So it just completely depends on, again, whatever emotion and topic you have at hand. You want to make sure it matches, which covers number 4, making sure your emotion and your topic matches. So again, this is completely up to you. It's at your discretion of how you decide to go about it, but just make sure that, again, it matches, because emotional appeal is used a lot today to try to persuade us audience members, us listeners, us viewers to do a certain thing, purchase a certain item, follow a certain idea. So make sure we are using pathos. Now let's go ahead and move forward. Now, that is the end of chapter 17, Methods of Persuasion. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. I'm more than happy to discuss this with you and clarify any questions that you have. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.